I'm Maggie. I'm a licensed clinical psychotherapist with degrees in psychology, theology, and marriage and family therapy, a national certification in dialectical behavioral therapy, and a national certification in integrative mental health. In this video, I'm not looking to diagnose anyone. I'm only willing to offer insight into situations like these.
All right. In sociology, a cult is, quote, a group with unusual or extreme beliefs and practices that often centers on a charismatic leader existing in tension with mainstream society. So that's what we're going to talk about today. For anybody new, when you see me looking down, it's because notes. I had lots of notes to keep me on track, but I want to welcome people in the chat. Auntie is first. Hi, my favorite auntie, triple peace sign. Adric is here. He says it's on. Chef Mike is here. Happy Sunday to you as well. Spain Man is here. Greetings to you. Adric says, let's hear it for the dancing Maggies. Yay. And for those of you who are in the clouds watching, please feel free to say hello in the comments. This is the best live tribe on YouTube, bar none. You will be welcomed as long as you're appropriate. And shout out to the replay gang. Okay, so we've got a lot of information to go through today. I'm going to get through history real quick, but we have to have the history. So much of history is hidden. So we've got to have some history to see where and why we are where we are now with this death cult. Hi, JB Designs. Thanks for being here. So quick. We're going to talk eugenics real quick. Okay. So in the early 1900s, the United States saw itself as like this experiment in freedom and liberty, right? That's how the United States fashioned themselves, as long as you don't include the black slaves. Beneath that promise, another creed was sort of undergirding and holding this up. It was a faith in hierarchy disguised as science. It preached that white people could be and should be the sole beneficiary of all of America's promises and all of their progress, regardless whether they did the work or not. So between 1900 and 1940, more than 30 states passed sterilization laws. So remember, this is the end of slavery. So we went from, people trying to breed the enslaved people to now there's too many of them. Now that they were let free, there's too many, right? So legislators called them reforms. Doctors called them medicine. It's just part of medicine, but it was control. And it wasn't just Black people they were trying to sterilize. So people who were intellectually disabled, people who had physical disabilities, people who had mental illness, all of them, right? Tens of thousands of people, the poor, the disabled, people in institutions, or simply people who we didn't want them to procreate, were rendered sterile by order of the state. Crazy, huh? Hi, Adrian. Thanks for being here. Ultron is in the building. So in 1927, the Supreme Court confirmed the legality of this power in Buck versus Bell. So if you want that number, it's 274 US 200. Okay, if you want to look it up. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. wrote the words that sealed it. 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. Those 7 words turned prejudice into legal precedents. They told governments that the quality of a population should and do outweigh the rights of a person. Hi, Rael, peace to you as well. So eugenics was not just this fringe delusion. It was the process, right? It was based in white, rich people being the masters, right? And white people in general being the master race, okay? It was taught at leading universities. It was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, and the Carnegie Institution, and celebrated at state fairs where judges crowned better babies. Presidents praised it as good stewardship. You got to take care of the nation's bloodline. And newspapers printed it beside the weather report. It was part of everyday life. Adrian says, I hate eugenics. Yeah, me too. So the 1924 Immigration Act applied the same arithmetic to citizenship. It set quotas favoring Northern and Western Europeans, read white, and we do that now. All the Afrikaners, the white folks from South Africa, got to come in free and clear, and they're not considered illegals, okay? But in the 1924 Immigration Act excluded entire continents from being able to come in. Its authors relied on the writings of Madison Grant, whose book, The Passing of the Great Race, warned that Nordic Americans were being diluted. This is the start of the Great Replacement. When Adolf Hitler later called that book his Bible, he was only echoing ideas that had already been codified into U.S. law. BGS Sipmore is here. Hi, BGS. Thanks for being here. And he said, not enough white folks now. Well, for whose standard? Depends on which ones. So after the Second World War, the revelations of Nazi atrocities forced Americans to look away from their own reflection, right? But Buck versus Bell was never overturned. The decision still sits in the United States Report, an artifact of the moment when democracy sanctified biological destiny. Still not overturned, okay? Eugenics survived translated into kind of a new vocabulary. You know how they do. It seems like there's always this rebrand. We're just going to change the words so that it's something completely different. Where eugenicists once spoke of heredity, policymakers spoke of welfare dependency, urban decay, undeserving population, and illegals, right? The same calculus of worth. So, who strengthens the nation and who burdens it? It guided housing covenants, school segregation, prison expansion, like it undergirds everything that we do. So when you hear somebody say that the United States was built on racism, this is one of the reasons, one of many, but it's one of the reasons that it's brought up. Adrian says now it's Christian nationalism. Yep, and that's the point I'm going to make today. And I think a lot of people see it. Rael says, well, miscegenation that advantaged whites was okay as long as mulattoes operated on behalf of their white side. Race mixing was okay as long as it benefited white elites. Right. If those children came out white passing, then it supported the white population so that they weren't replaced. Poor things, right? The dilution didn't count if the kids can pass for white. So even in the age of digital genetics and biometric surveillance, this impulse endures. We still hear about it. Data replaces family trees. Algorithms replace the examiners. But the question is still the same. Who is fit to belong? Who is fit to reproduce? And who is fit to be counted as fully human? i.e., who do they not dehumanize? We already know that Sydney Sweeney has good genes, right? All right, so this is where the cult of supremacy begins, in that history, okay? Not in open hatred, although that existed and still exists to today, but in the administrative efficiency, the cold conviction of life to be ranked and managed for who they see as worthy. From the laboratory of policy would grow the doctrines that followed, right? The sanctification of wealth, right? We have this hero worship, this billionaire worship that's baked into our society right now. We assume that somebody who has a lot of money is super smart and super good and super moral and they're amazing, and we worship them like they're some sort of superstar. We've sanctified wealth, we've weaponized faith, and we have a nation that calls inequality divine order, right? We have the elect, we have the chosen ones, and we're not making a distinction between policy and religious dogma anymore. Adrian says Charles Koch's father was a strict anti-misogynist. Fun fact. Well, and where I live, the Kochs run everything. Rael said they also used mulattoes to infiltrate Blacks to keep an eye on them, like people like W.B. Du Bois, who was of Haitian origin, not FBA. I will take your word for that, I'm sure. I mean, you think about, they had people infiltrating the Black Panthers. They had people infiltrating, Dr. King's inner circle. I don't doubt that these things always happen. Okay. So by the 21st century, the vocabulary of eugenics has changed. Okay. It's no longer framed as science. It returned to politics. Now it calls itself the Great Replacement. So the claim is, it's very basic. It's simple, right? It's false, but it's simple, that white Americans are being replaced by immigrants and by any person of color, okay? Assisted by this shadowy collection of ne'er-do-wells, right? Who are trying to replace all the white people, okay? The fear is definitely older than the name because it goes back to eugenics. It was there in the 1924 Immigration Act in the quotes that sought to freeze the nation's complexion as white. It was there in the redlined neighborhoods. We're going to keep them over there. In the segregated schools, we got to keep everybody over there. Every generation receives the same warning, just in new language, right? They're coming for what is yours. They're trying to take your jobs. They're trying to take your money. They're trying to take your women. They're doing this. They, right? It's always be scared, be scared, be scared. We have to protect ourselves. And in protecting ourselves, we can be violent. Against what? Nothing. But we can be violent if we've been thought to believe they're coming for us. So we can kill them before they come. It's a little odd. Raul says they also use mulattoes to... Oh, I already said that one. Okay. So the phrase Great Replacement was popularized in Europe in the early 2000s. We are in the modern times, okay, by French writer Renaud Camus, okay, probably Camus, who described immigration as an invasion. We can get violent, right, against an invasion. In the United States, it migrated quickly into talk radio, into campaign speeches. Candidates began promising to defend the homeland and preserve our culture. Donald Trump echoed it in his rallies and online posts, warning that immigrants were replacing Americans and destroying our country. He still says this stuff now. He literally stated that the Great Replacement theory is real. He said it on social media himself. So what began as this racist fever dream became a rallying cry of mainstream politics. Behind the slogan lies arithmetic, okay? This replacement. If power depends on numbers, then citizenship becomes a weapon, right? So this is where we get the voter suppression laws, gerrymandering, closing of the government, refusing to sign people in, mass disenfranchisement. It all draws legitimacy from the same imagined emergency that demographic change equals death of the white folks. The myth supplies moral cover for policies that restrict who can vote, who can cross a border, and who can be believed when they speak, even who is a full human and right to be a citizen. Spainman says, funny though, how all those immigrants seem to come from countries they've effed with. Isn't that? It's just a coincidence. So it sanctifies the violence, right? It's a fight. It's a fight for our nation, a fight for our culture. The shooters in Charleston, El Paso, Buffalo, and a lot of other cities left behind manifestos invoking replacement. They were all white, by the way. They described their massacres as acts of preservation. They're going to war to save the white people. Each of them pulled a trigger on the same idea that was loaded by legislators and talk shows. The replacement theory thrives because it offers fear and innocence, right? It's not me that's doing anything. They're coming for my stuff, right? It tells its believers that they are victims. Boy, howdy do I hate this perpetual victim stance. I'm always the victim, right? They're not beneficiaries of this privileged hierarchy, right? They're victims and they're just trying to hold on to what's theirs because everybody's trying to steal it. It transforms any loss of privilege into proof that they're being persecuted. They're coming for me. Anything that might make anything fair and equitable is persecution. It lets the architects of inequality pose as casualties. It tells them that any loss of privilege is oppression because the promise of privilege is their birthright. Interesting. Yet the real replacement has already occurred. Okay, this is where we are. Truth replaced by the narrative. Okay, history is replaced by everybody having a grievance. Citizenship is replaced by allegiance to the blood and the tribe, right? This is how democracy is hollowed from within, not by a sudden coup, but by the slow substitution of the myth of country for what is actually the truth. The cult of supremacy survives on this myth because it needs an enemy to justify its power. Have to have an enemy. Without fear, without the ability to dog whistle, without the ability to enact people to violence, it has no purpose. Without hierarchy, it has no identity. That is their identity. The great replacement is not like a prophecy of the future, but almost like a confession of the past. It's a nation afraid to live without domination, without the boogeyman. And most of us know where that statement comes from. Without the boogeyman, people may begin to ask too many questions. If it's not a state of an emergency, we might think of some other things. So by the late 20th century, the architecture of American power had shifted. The instruments of control were no longer confined to eugenics laws or immigration quotas. They moved into the boardrooms, into the lobbyist offices, and into these international summits. So corporations expanded beyond the national borders. The world's getting smaller. All of our Western businesses are doing business elsewhere, not just the places that they colonized. Industries have consolidated. We see this in the media so much. They were concentrating wealth in fewer and fewer hands. Financial institutions gained the ability to shape the policy. And they can do it directly through campaign contributions, lobbying, their think tanks. It's always a think tank, right? Like Project 2025. Laws governing labor, trade, and taxation increasingly reflected the interests of the wealthy elite rather than the general population. But let's be honest, the elites have always shaped policy in the United States. It just became more and more public. They're not trying to hide it anymore. Adrian says, facts, Maggie. Combine that with fear and anger being the number one motivation for voting, you come up with a winning strategy come election time. Absolutely. Absolutely. So politicians recognized this consolidation of influence, and many described it publicly. George H.W. Bush, addressing a joint session of Congress in 1991, spoke of a new world order, and that he was saying it was emerging after the Cold War, a world in which nations and economies would coordinate more closely, right, to preserve peace and stability. I really hate when politicians say things out loud and then when we repeat them, hey, I can pull up video from like 20 politicians, at least 10 of them US presidents, promoting a new world order. And then people tell me it's a conspiracy theory. I didn't pull the video, but there is a montage out there. Okay. But Bush was repeating a phrase that was said before him by his father. And it was said before him by Reagan, okay? Successive leaders repeated the phrase, sometimes ambiguously, right? Sometimes strategically, often invoking it as a vision of global cooperation, while the mechanisms of governance become increasingly removed from the ordinary citizens. Do you guys feel like you're represented in government? Yet we have taxation without representation right now. Even Obama promoted the New World Order. Behind the rhetoric, networks of corporations, banks, transnational institutions shape the markets, right? They shape the labor policies. They shape the trade agreements, especially right now. Organizations like the Council on Foreign Relations, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund become influential, these are all global things, in guiding both domestic and international policies. Lobbying groups with policy councils coordinated legislation in ways that prioritize capital over community. The same elites who benefited from early 20th century eugenics now command the levers of modern governance, ensuring that wealth and power were increasingly inherited rather than earned. No kings, right? But all of this power is inherited. One second, I need to clear my throat. Sorry about that. Okay, so this is the quiet machinery of supremacy working. Okay, centralization disguised as efficiency, hierarchy disguised as globalizing. It operates under the guise of cooperation, of inevitable progress. This is just where we're heading. Yet it concentrates power and reduces accountability. National governments may appear sovereign, but their policies are constrained by networks that span industries, go across borders, and go across all of these different ideologies. The West is the cancer that just grows and grows to the point of those governments being places where the United States or the West interfered. And aren't we always doing that? So, within this framework, the language of fear and purity and heredity, right? This is our heritage, Southern heritage. Confederate flag is about heritage. This is where it finds fertile ground. Policies restricting voting access, curtailing dissent, targeting marginalized communities are justified as protecting the nation, protecting the economy, protecting the American way of life. The New World Order is not a secret cabal, okay? It is public now. It is observable, and they have an alignment of interest that rewards the few and disciplines everybody else. Everybody else. All right, so supremacy survives by concentrating control, right? Shaping perception and defining who has value and how much value they have. The elites of today inherit not only wealth, but the moral license. They get to say what's right and wrong. They have the moral license to guide the nation according to their vision. And the machinery of power is not a specific political party. Hear me when I say this. The machinery of power is not a specific political party. It's bigger than that. It's bigger than any specific administration, more resilient than anything ever thrown at it, and more pervasive than just the simple laws. We see the Constitution being disregarded and dismantled every day. And the devastation's only getting worse. Adrian says, next, the ones that have skimmed the most off of the toxic soup they created will now create technates for themselves to calcify their wealth. Shout out to libertarianism. And I have been talking something about that, similar to that, that they are deporting all of these people and getting rid of all the help for farmers. And then they're taking away their government assistance. They use a lot. And so that they will go bankrupt. At the same time, JD Vance's group is buying up all the farmland. At the same time, they're funneling all of these people into prisons. Well, I shouldn't get ahead of myself. I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to talk about it. All right. So faith, like policy, can be a tool of power. In the United States, Christianity has often been intertwined with national identity, yet it's also been mobilized to enforce hierarchy and justify domination. Let's show you a little video.
Organized Christianity has always been an imperial religion for political power. That's what it was designed to do. Now, the original Christian church was very decentralized. There were different sects. It was very egalitarian. They often lived in communal settings, and there was a lot of gender equity. The house churches were often run and started by women. There were female deacons, apostles, saints, and they had varying beliefs on things like the divinity of Christ. Now, when Constantine converted to Christianity, he didn't. He was a practicing pagan. He had just made Christianity legal. It was now a major sect in Rome, which was a failing nation, and he wanted to try to control both political power in the state and religion. So when he called the Council of Nicaea and summoned bishops under his rule to decide what Christians would now move forward to believe, one of the big pushes was Trinitarianism, because they had to have the established 100% divinity of Christ, which was not believed by all Christians at the time. Why? Because only bishops and councils could determine the nature of God. By determining Trinitarianism as the new gold standard for Christianity, Constantine now controlled the church. He controlled people's access to faith and to heaven and hell. And then from 367 to 397, we see the Bible start to be pulled together, especially from texts that aligned with Greco-Roman patriarchal standards, including the female submission of women was heavily emphasized, anything that emphasized male leadership, male property inheritance, and anything that gave you permission to kind of extinguish your enemies if they didn't agree with you, which is exactly what Trinitarians did. Once that was the established code for Christians, they annihilated groups like the Gnostics and the Arians, not those Arians, different Arians. And then in 405, we get the Jerome's Vulgate, which was commissioned by Pope Damascus, which is the first Catholic Bible that we have in summary, including the books of the Apocrypha, which did have some female exemplars. Well, they got rid of those in the Protestant Reformation under Martin Luther, who took out characters like Judith and Susanna so that they could even narrow further the focus of how women participated in Christendom. And it was Martin Luther who said, if they die in childbearing, let them. It's what they're here for. He also said that prostitution is okay because it prevents men from committing adultery and rape.
I like her, but she talks so fast. She talks so fast. I don't even think she takes a break, but she just gave you the entire history, which I've talked about the history of these things several times on this channel. She did it super fast, so we let her do that. So throughout the 20th century, religious leaders and institutions framed obedience as virtue. Slave Bible, anyone? They frame submission as being moral and hierarchy as divinely ordained. The rhetoric has been clear. Those at the top were chosen by God to lead, and those at the bottom had a place, right? And their place is not to challenge that order. Evangelical movements amplified these ideas in politics. Christian nationalism, which is an intertwining of faith and state authority, positioned policy decisions as moral imperatives. Issues ranging from reproductive rights to immigration policy were justified as protecting a Christian nation. Preachers spoke of, and still speak of, culture under siege, of an American society threatened by secularism, foreign influence, and moral decay. They're all rapists who come across the border, right? Church pulpits became platforms for political mobilization, influencing elections, legislation, and public perception. We see Turning Point's All-American halftime show that is an alternative to a Christian American performer. But he's not white. Simultaneously, theological doctrines were paired with economic and racial hierarchies. Prosperity theology, for instance, teaches that wealth and success are signs of divine favor. You have been blessed because you're better. While poverty indicated moral or spiritual failure. This is bringing eugenics into Christianity. These messages reinforced that social stratification, providing both a spiritual rationale and a psychological incentive for compliance with established power. We see the Mormons, we see that Pastor Save, which I call him Rico Suave, and other political/religious leaders incorporating racism and eugenics into their Christian nationalism. Auntie says Constantine's mother, Helena, was a real piece of work and doubled down on her son's power. Isn't it always the white moms? Anyway, Christianity was explicitly weaponized to normalize violence. Sermons glorified being a martyr, dying. I mean, how many people said that Charlie Kirk was a martyr? He died for his faith. They glorify sacrifice and obedience, while textbooks and Sunday school curricula celebrated conquest and national superiority, while they look at white Jesus. Children were taught loyalty to God and country as inseparable virtues, merging religious faith with civic duty. And the biggest thing, to die for either one of those things, well, that is the best and most virtuous thing a person can do. Die for God and country. Churches and religious networks also influence legislation. Those lobbyists are huge, shaping policies that align with those same hierarchical ideas. From opposition to the labor unions to support for punitive criminal justice measures, faith became a vehicle to extend the authority of the elites into your everyday life. By cloaking power in this divine right, supremacy achieved moral legitimacy. It is a moral imperative that is not easily challenged, right? In the US, Christianity creates consent, fosters obedience, and instills the notion that hierarchy is natural, that it is inevitable, that it is righteous. It is a weapon not because it preaches violence, but because it teaches blind and total allegiance to a structure that privileges some lives while subordinating everyone's else. So let's test where we are today. Are we in a cult of supremacy? All right, so I'm going to go through some of the, actually, I'm going to go through all of the criteria for how sociologists define a cult. Okay, this is a sociological definition. Number one, religious syncretism and theocratic identity. MAGA Christian nationalism fuses evangelical Christianity with authoritarian populism, creating this new ideology that treats Trumpism as divine. People will say Trump is God's chosen instrument. And when you bring up all this other stuff that he's done, they'll say, well, he is imperfect but ordained. God uses the imperfect. They don't care, right? They're brainwashed. Adrian says, render unto Caesar's what is Caesar. Why do they always want to quote that? Because they want to be in your pocket. If Caesar shows up, I'll give him money. Not a new Caesar, the old one. All right, number two, charismatic, messianic leadership. So the quote, savior of America, the depictions of Trump on the cross, pastors and preachers publicly anointing him. They make his atrocities sacred. You know, God uses imperfect vessels to do what is needed. His atrocities are sacred. Number three, total ideological fusion. So it means there's no separation of the sacred and the secular, no separation of church and state. Political loyalty is religious devotion. They are one and the same and interchangeable. The nationalist myth becomes religious dogma. America and Israel are united, right? People say Trump is Cyrus. People say, oh, the left are all satanic. They're all demons. They all worship the devil. There's no separation of the sacred and the secular. Number four, apocalyptic and eschatological framing. Okay, interpreting events as signs of biblical prophecy, like elections and wars and pandemics and January 6th, all of those things. It gives the followers this cosmic mission. We're on a mission. Again, we are victims who have to protect ourselves. This is why you get people saying there's a war on Christianity, and everybody looks at each other like, what? This is why. Number 5. Oh, wait, before I get to number 5. Adrian says, is it really MAGA Christianity, or is this the culmination of a 50-year plan and Trump is the right megalomaniac for the job? Both, right? This is just the name of it now. Remember, we have different names, right? But this has been a plan. I mean, number one, it's been a lot of this has been the plan all along. It's how the nation was formed. But then they started creating plans, right? The Heritage Foundation was planning this stuff for 50 years. People like them, right? So yes, this is a culmination. Who is doing it? The MAGA Christian nationalists. That's just who they are that are doing this now. Okay. And yes, they needed the right megalomaniac for the job. So number 5, tension with mainstream society. So this is where we get things like that's fake news, or education is corrupt and too woke. Science is satanic. They just want the echo chamber of disinformation. They always have to battle against the mainstream. All right, I'm going to play you a video. When I do, the name comes up. It's Cameron McLeod. You guys all need to go follow him. He is an amazing artist, but this is something he put out. He puts out a new rhyme every day. He's doing that every day for a year. But this one, chef's kiss. So I'm going to play it for you.
They make their own halftime show and pretend it's for the Christians. But when an ICE agent shoots pastors, they don't pay attention. Their sins get justified, so they never pray for forgiveness. They funded genocide for Nobel Peace Prize recognition. And they took the First Amendment, and they started hiding lynches. They pray to Charlie Kirk in church and curse all those against them. And to make these matters worse, they forcing births upon these women. Cause they claim pro-life unless it's bullets that are killing children. Cause the shooting's barely mentioned, even though it's like one a week. And I'm proud to be an Antifa in the United States of Germany. If it's immigration and Wakataka, the military facility. And the government been shut down for so long, it might become Spirit Halloween.
Isn't that great? I love that last part. It might become Spirit Halloween. But I highly recommend everybody, go and follow him, support him. He is up and coming. So what else is used other than Christianity? Because it's not just Christianity. Capitalism has always been used as a weapon. And I know that we've been indoctrinated to think capitalism is great. And boy, if capitalism was pure, it would work fine. And if capitalism was used how it was supposed to be used, everything would be fine. Unfortunately, capitalism relies on a caste system. There cannot be people with lots of capital unless there are people with no capital. That is how pure capitalism works. It's always been used as a weapon. The power in America is enforced not just by faith or law, but by money. Money makes the world go around, right? Capitalism, especially in its modern form, functions as a weapon. It's an instrument for shaping society, preserving the caste system, and reinforcing that supremacy. Those who are on top are just better than everybody else, even though we change all the rules and break all the rules and do everything so that we are on top, right? Economic policy has long been a vehicle for maintaining inequality. Tax codes, regulatory frameworks, labor laws, they frequently favor the wealthy, entrenching privilege across generations. Wealth is not merely just accumulated. Okay, it is consolidated, it is institutionalized, it is inherited, it is translated into political influence. Corporations lobby Congress, they fund think tanks, they guide public discourse. In this system, access to power is determined by inheritance and connection. And the wealth gap just keeps getting bigger and bigger. The logic of exploitation is embedded into these labor practices. Low wages, precarious employment, and corporate control over housing, healthcare, and education impose constraints on the majority while ensuring surplus resources flow upward. I've said that many times. Resources flow upward, and we are left with the scraps. Those at the top are swimming in resources. They can waste more money in a day than the average person earns in their lifetime. These people have more money than can be spent in 10 generations. And they have no problem with poverty or people starving on the street because profit is moralized as merit. It's their fault they're poor. It's their fault they're on the street. There must just be something inherently wrong with them. While deprivation is blamed on personal failure or some eugenics throwback. In this way, capitalism frames inequality as natural, inevitable, and right, the same way that they justified chattel slavery. Financial crises further illustrate this dynamic. When the economy falters, the consequences are distributed very unevenly, right? I mean, the biggest welfare queens are white farmers. Working class families bear the burden of unemployment and foreclosures, while bailouts will rescue whole ass financial institutions. The mechanisms of recovery, ostensibly designed to stabilize the society, they only preserve the same hierarchies that caused the crisis. Capitalism becomes a system in which risk is socialized and reward is privatized. We see it now. Trump ran on the platform of lowering grocery costs, of lowering gas prices, of helping the common man, and releasing the Epstein files, but we'll talk about that later. We're heading toward the primaries, and none of the promises have come true. In fact, for many, it is much, much worse. However, the wealthy elites, well, they're getting tax break after even more tax breaks with no ceiling on their gluttony. Why is the government shut down? Because they would rather spend their money on tax breaks for the wealthy than on health insurance for the many.
Hey there, Luigi. I made this. They got no shame. No place. The richest to be alive. We won't be.
So Adrian says the biggest welfare queen now is Argentina. And while I don't disagree, I was thinking when you said that about how, they talk about welfare queens, right? And we know they're talking about Black women. They always, even though white women, when we talk about just like SNAP benefits and stuff like that, white women have always gotten more welfare than anybody else. But when they talk about this, people are like, well, your hair is done, your nails are done, and you're buying soda pop with your SNAP benefits and you're driving a 5-year-old Cadillac Escalade. And, they say all these things. What are the farmers driving? Millions of dollars worth of farm implements, $100,000 pickup truck. They're getting millions, not the Black farmers, the white farmers. The white farmers are getting millions in government assistance. Well, not anymore because Trump took it away. And now they're complaining. I voted for Trump. He shouldn't. Well, I don't know what made you think you were safe. But this economic structure also shapes culture and identity. Advertising, media, and education inculcate the values of consumption, competition, individualism, right? Citizens are trained to measure your success by accumulation. How much stuff and how much good stuff can you have? And what is your status? What is your job? What do you do? This is what men say to each other all the time because they're taught to. Internalizing the hierarchies that govern them. Obedience and aspiration are now intertwined. Submit to the system, and you could ascend. Resist, and you become one of the marginalized. They tell you what happiness is. They tell you how to live. They tell you what to believe. That is called propaganda. Did you know many countries in the world consider the US to have the most indoctrinated media? Many countries do. Did you know that in many Asian countries, they are surprised, especially China, they are surprised that we actually believe what is played on the news. They know that the news is state-run propaganda meant to divide the populace. So, through capital, the elites achieve more than wealth. They secure the loyalty, they dictate behavior, they normalize the social stratification. Economic inequality, like eugenics or religious indoctrination, is justified as natural law. The strong survive. Might equals right. It becomes moral as well as material. It is your fault you are poor. And in its global dimension, capitalism ensures that power is concentrated not only within specific nations, but across them, linking domestic policy to transnational networks that enforce the interest of the few over the many.
So ICE has increased their signing bonuses to $50,000, up from the original $30,000, and that does not include the $45,000 potential annual bonus, even though most Americans get a $2,500 annual bonus. ICE now has more money than the entire Russian military, and they're getting their student loans forgiven, but we can't give raises to teachers or forgive student loans for nurses, doctors, teachers, etc. And while they claim that we do not have the budget to provide health care or to have pediatric cancer research, and that most Americans will be paying increased insurance premiums as early as next year because of subsidies being withdrawn from the Affordable Care Act, we apparently have enough money to give $50,000 bonuses to Gestapo soldiers who will wear masks and execute arrests without warrants and deport both U.S. citizens and legal residents to third world countries that they've never been to, as well as people who are attending their immigration meetings. We also apparently don't have enough money for healthcare or education or infrastructure, but we have enough for a $200 million gold-plated ballroom outside of the White House, and now the entire Rose Garden has been paved over to make a type of beach platform similar to Mar-a-Lago that will also cost another $100 million. And the plane from Qatar that Trump is retrofitting that will cost taxpayers $1 billion, we have money for that. And also, by the way, when he leaves office, he gets to keep it.
There's capitalism. In this sense, capitalism is not merely a system of trade. It is the weapon of supremacy. It is wielded with subtlety and to scale. It shapes opportunity, it dictates all the consequences, and it enforces and reinforces hierarchy under the guise of choice, freedom, and prosperity. So, faith and wealth are reinforced by force. In the United States, nationalism has long been intertwined with military and policing structures, creating a framework in which power is both celebrated and enforced. Nationalism presents the nation as sacred. Its boundaries are untouchable, the borders, right? And its people are exceptional. Well, according to them, the real Americans anyway. It defines insiders and outsiders, drawing lines of belonging that often align with race, class, and religion. The ideology justifies the expansion of military and law enforcement powers under the guise of defending the nation. This is where "go back to Africa" comes from. They equate real Americans as white. And if you are not them, you are an other. So you must belong somewhere else. The military in this context is not only a defensive institution, but a projection of supremacy. We got a $1 trillion budget for our military. It's the big swinging phallus of this would-be dictator. American interventions abroad, justified by rhetorics of freedom and bringing democracy or securing the area, have consistently advanced the interests of elites and reinforced those same hierarchies everywhere. Wars and conflicts have been created, and they create both economic opportunity and political control, concentrating more wealth and legitimizing state authority. Domestically, here, policing and border enforcement extend these hierarchies into our daily life. They are being shoved into our daily life. The creation of agencies such as the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, the expansion of federal surveillance, because it is wild right now, and the militarization of local law enforcement really reinforce the boundaries of inclusion and exclusion.
You literally can join ICE and be God's appointed avenger, right? Who seeks to carry out God's vengeance on the evildoer. Immigration is evil. So to join the proper mechanism through ICE and to become, in that sense, God's appointed deacon to carry out vengeance on the evildoer who is devouring the inheritance of the children, that is a righteous thing. You can join ICE today and make Jesus smile as you, with a gun, pack foreigners into the back of a van to be kicked out of the country.
He literally just proved everything I have said so far. But Joel Webbin's a real piece of work. So detention, deportation, and criminalization become tools to manage populations who are deemed undesirable, controlling who may move freely, who may work safely, and who can participate fully in civic life. We're seeing this in DC, Chicago, Portland, Memphis. The forcing of people's hands, the pressure to act and to defend yourself so that a state of emergency can be called and the Insurrection Act can be enabled. This is the strategy for that plenary authority. Nationalism also shapes public sentiment. framing dissent as disloyalty and protest as a threat. What were they just saying about this No Kings protest? They're all Hamas and devil worshippers, right? And they're all paid. Symbols, ceremonies, and patriotic narratives cultivate this same compliance, right? They link identity to obedience. Citizens are encouraged to internalize that hierarchy as natural and necessary, while the mechanisms of enforcement, the court system, police, prisons, operate largely beyond anybody's scrutiny. If a judge said it, that's it. And a judge said that Trump can do whatever he wants. So is that it? Although many judges have stopped him recently. So Adrian says, then combine that with Save saying that Black folks look like Satan and are here to kill, steal, and destroy. Who do we think these God warriors will be dispatched against? Right. They're framing the others as demonic. Okay. Any opposition is the devil. So the combination of nationalist ideology with military and police power produces a system in which supremacy is both defended and celebrated. It creates a society in which fear of external and internal threats justifies these extraordinary measures, right? In which violence is not only tolerated, but requested. What does Trump say all the time? Well, people ask me to be a dictator, and I'm not a dictator, but I could be a dictator if I wanted to be a dictator. And, people are telling me that, Portland's on fire and is war torn, and people are asking, to send the military, and people are wanting, just him. The white Christian nationalist is deputized in this very system, and it activates them to act. So now we have these white Christian nationalists just on the street being even more Karenish to the point of violence now. The apparatus of the state functions to maintain the dominance of the few over the many. Now we're going to look at this. Hopefully you all have heard of this. Spain Man says, boy, they've sure strayed away from any fidelity of the Constitution they used to give lip service to. It was all fake. I think it was all, me personally, I think it was all fake. So we have this Politico article talking about the young Republicans and their racist chat messages. And young does not mean underage, by the way. These are people who are like under 40, they're just young adults, and they're racist chat. So you can see some of these. Everyone that votes no is going to the gas chamber, well, when do we bring that sign out? Also, we are officially under consideration for a Trump endorsement. Well, I'm ready to watch people burn now, right? You're expecting a Jew to be honest. Great, I love Hitler. Right? We know what they're talking about with the monkeys. If we ever had a leak of this chat, we would be cooked for real. When do we start bullying, dude? It was rape. Well, he also hates the Jews. They love the watermelon people. This girl is fully, and I think the word that they took out was retarded. And then stay in the closet, FAGGOT, right? This is just a snippet. There were hundreds, right? So they worried about what would happen if it got out, but they just kept saying stuff anyway. They referred to Black people as monkeys and the watermelon people. They mused about putting their political opponents in gas chambers. They talked about raping their enemies and driving them to suicide, and lauded Republicans who they believe support slavery. So William Hendricks, who has since been fired, the Kansas Young Republicans vice chair, used the words N with an A on the end and the N word with UH on the end, which is variations of a racial slur. We all know what it is, more than a dozen times in the chat. Bobby Walker, the vice chair of the New York State Young Republicans at the time, referred to rape as epic. It's epic, dude. Peter Gunther, who at the time was chair of the same organization, wrote in a message sent in June that everyone that votes no is going to the gas chamber. Gunther was referring to an upcoming vote on whether he should become chair of the Young Republican National Federation, the GOP's 15,000 member political organization for Republicans between 18 and 40. Okay. I'm going to create some of the greatest physiological torture methods known to man. We only want true believers, he continued. Torture. 2 members of the chat responded. Well, when do we start bullying, dude? We have a solid 3 people who can probably have them want to jump. If they vote for us, why would they be gassed? Oh, when do we bring that side out? We only want true believers. Well, can we fix the showers? Gas chambers don't fit the Hitler aesthetic. Well, I'm ready to watch people burn now. Well, we got to pretend that we like them. Hey, come on in, take a nice shower and relax. Boom, they're dead. This is how they're talking, right? The exchange is part of hundreds of Telegram chats obtained by Politico and spanning more than 7 months of messages among young Republican leaders in New York, Kansas, Arizona, and Vermont. And anybody who didn't say anything in the chat sure didn't say it was wrong either. The chat offers an unfiltered look at how a new generation of GOP activists talk when they think nobody is listening. Interesting, huh? The 2,900 pages of chats shared among a dozen millennial and Gen Z Republicans between early January and mid-August chronicle their campaign to seize control of the National Young Republican Organization on a hardline pro-Donald Trump platform. Many of the chat members already work inside the government or in party politics, and one is a state senator. Wow. Wow. And what did J.D. Vance have to say about it? Oh, kids will be kids. Kids will be kids. Spainman says, always funny when they say this stuff while clearly being influenced by Black lingo. Definitely. And again, look at pictures of them. I'm just going to say, I'm not saying anything, but if you want a good laugh, taking into mind what they're saying, you know, part being the master race or whatever, just look at some pictures. Just it might be fun. Just look at some pictures. I'm not going to do that on my channel, but you know, I'm just, if you want, right? So through faith, finance, and force, the instruments of control are unified. Together, they form a durable architecture of supremacy. One that shapes identity, that limits opportunity, and enforces obedience under the guise of protection, morality, patriotism, you know, law and order. Hi, Alicia. Thanks for being here. They sound like complete psychopaths. I totally agree. So, power is preserved not only through the policy, the wealth, the force, but through the shaping of the perception, right? In the United States, propaganda has long functioned as a tool to normalize the hierarchy, to glorify violence and death, and to cultivate obedience. We start at age 5 proclaiming our adherence to the system through the Pledge of Allegiance. We start pledging our allegiance to that system. From the earliest films to modern media, narratives celebrating conquest, sacrifice, and national supremacy saturate the American culture. The first movie that was eventually shown in theaters, but was premiered in the White House was Birth of a Nation in 1915, right? It was full from start to finish of overtly racist and degrading portrayals of Black people, along with glorifying the KKK. Wars are framed as moral imperatives, as spiritual battle, as victories are inevitable, and the fallen as heroes. They'll be in heaven. Jesus will love. How many pictures did you guys see of portrayals of Jesus hugging Charlie Kirk, right? These are heroes whose deaths justify the ongoing conflict. Just look at the South's lost cause and the worship of the statues and the stories of the traitors who died. They glorify them. Children learn these narratives in classrooms and through media, absorbing this moral architecture that equates obedience with virtue and violence and death with honor. Our movies and entertainment just get more and more violent and bloody. Something people may not be aware of, but when the studios look to do a sequel of an action movie, particularly, one of the markers is that there needs to be more dead bodies or more violence or more blood than in the previous movie for an action movie, right? Like you got to make it grosser so that it'll do well on its own. So I'm probably aging myself, but I'm going to talk about the Rambo series, right? So in Rambo 1, First Blood, there was one death in the entire movie. One death. Rambo First Blood Part 2, there were 129 deaths. Rambo 3, there were 6,174 deaths. So for Rambo 2008, they decided to focus on more intense and bloody combat scenes to raise that intensity, more gore. But in Last Blood, he confronts and kills an entire cartel. Adrian says, Charlie Kirk mythology equals lost cause rhetoric 2.0. Yeah. So religious institutions participate in this reinforcement. We see it even more now. Sermons, texts, even their rituals valorize sacrifice, suffering, and submission, creating a spiritual context in which domination is divinely sanctioned. Christian churches hang depictions of Jesus's dead and bloody body at the front for everyone to see. Would that be appropriate for anyone else? And people wear the methods of his murder around their necks as a form of worship. Worshiping what? His death? It's not about his sacrifice because there's many other symbols for the sacrifice. They want to promote the death, the murder. I mean, if I was shot, I wouldn't want people to remember me by wearing little gold guns around their necks. That's not who I am, and that's not who I was. The cross was not Jesus, and it was never a symbol of him and his message, and it should have never been his legacy. It's a T made out of wood that people were hung on to die, not just Jesus. And using that murder scene to glorify him doesn't really sound Jesus-y to me. By intertwining patriotism, faith, and morality, the glorification of death becomes naturalized, right? Its consequences are obscured, and its compliance is socially enforced. You're a martyr. Spain Man says it's very macabre. Yes, it is, and it's gross. And people take their kids into these churches where this wrangled, bloody body is hanging at the front of it. It's just gross. So this cultural conditioning sustains the machinery of supremacy. Violence is celebrated. Hierarchy is justified. And the human cost is rendered this abstract notion. You're a martyr and a hero if you die for someone else's cause. A society trained to venerate sacrifice and obedience is a society prepared to tolerate inequality, to just happily accept oppression and to participate in its own subordination. Any sacrifice is worth it as long as I don't have to sacrifice anything. But anything you have to sacrifice, totally worth it. In short, this death cult operates as much through belief as through force, using propaganda to make violence and hierarchy seem natural, necessary, and moral. This is their moral supremacy. Its power lies not only in what it does, but in what it teaches its citizens to believe. JB Design says people don't realize this level of cultural conditioning creates extreme disdain and resistance against the group perpetuating it, hence why the US is on a political island right now. Yeah. Sometimes it seems like they take it just a little too far. Sorry, my dog just came to say hello. Go have a little scritchies. Okay. All right. So, supremacy is maintained even more, not just laws and armies and spirituality and money, but by shaping the most intimate aspects of our lives. Our gender, who we are, our family, and our children. In the United States, patriarchal structures have long been used to enforce hierarchy and control behavior. Now I'm going to side note and talk about the patriarchy. Because yes, we live in an extraordinarily patriarchal system under a patriarchal government. But the patriarchy does not include anyone who is not a rich white man. Really, the long name should be rich white male patriarchy. So when we talk about the patriarchy, we cannot really find examples where anybody who is not a rich white male were able to benefit from the patriarchy directly. Some white women do, for sure, because they're married to these guys and they're having their kids. So, but benefiting directly, nobody else, okay? Religious institutions codified these patterns. Scholars such as Whitehead and Perry in Taking America Back for God, which came out in 2019, document how Christian nationalist movements reinforce the traditional gender roles, portraying women primarily as mothers, moral guardians, and keepers of the family virtue. And if there's any failure in that, it's her fault. Deviations from these roles are framed as moral or spiritual failures. A career-oriented woman? Well, that's of the devil. It justifies social censure and exclusion. Education, both public and private. Well, so I'm going to side note for a second because I just talked about women, but this is also why people like Charlie Kirk and them get upset when Black people are in high positions or positions of authority or highly educated positions. It's the same patriarchy. It's just wrong and unnatural. All right, so education, both public and private, has been a site of indoctrination. Curricula in schools, religious instruction, and especially homeschooling movements often promote obedience. That's the first thing they teach kids in school: blind obedience. Teachers don't have to earn respect. They don't even have to be good people or right. They could be terrible, but you have to obey. They reinforce rigid gender norms and instill fear of moral corruption. We've also seen the opposite happen, where they're enforcing some things they shouldn't. Studies from the National Center for Education Statistics show that sex education varies dramatically by region, and it often aligns with the local political and religious ideologies, reinforcing that patriarchal control. Historically, corporal punishment and rigid discipline were widely accepted mechanisms of behavioral control in school and home. Research published in Child Development and other peer-reviewed journals demonstrates that such practices are teaching compliance through fear and physical authority. I'm bigger, I'm stronger, so I'm right. It's the might equals right ideology. Nina says, look at what they did to control and still do say about, Mary Magdalene. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. People still say, oh, she was a prostitute. She wasn't. A pope said it over 1,000 years ago. And it just kept getting repeated. And so then by the time the pope comes out and says, oh, he confused Mary Magdalene with this other Mary, nobody cares. She's still a prostitute. So child exploitation has been intersected with these elite networks of power. Verified legal records, I want to say that out loud, show that Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell engaged in sex trafficking of minors, resulting in federal convictions. That is the U.S. District Court, Southern District of New York. It happened in 2021 and 2022. Investigative reporting by the New York Times and the Washington Post documents these abuses and their connections to wealthy figures and political figures, illustrating how children can be manipulated and abused to maintain that elite dominance. And because the elites control everything, they control the Epstein files, which I'll talk about more in a little bit. So I want to take a little vote, those of you who are listening and the replay gang, who thinks Trump is in the files as a purveyor of young girls? Let's put a hand emoji in the chat. Vote. Who thinks that Trump was a purveyor, a user of young girls in the Epstein files? So personally, I don't care who else is in there. Whoever is in there, put them all in prison. People are like, well, Clinton, okay, put him in jail. I don't care. Put him in prison. If they did this, put them all in prison. And then people say, but what if it's half the federal government? Then what? Put them all in prison. Our president has been found guilty of 34 felonies. He has had 25 allegations of sexual abuse or misconduct, and he was found liable in a case and where he was labeled at the end, he's labeled as a sexual predator. Mr. Grab him by the pussy has definitely settled out of court a few times over. Complex Design says he's in the files as an informant. Yeah, that's one of the narratives that is out. I think the women who have said that he did much more than inform, and I've read some of those court documents. Those court documents helped prosecute Maxwell and Epstein both, but they left out who was the person doing it. And then when you see it's Trump that they're saying did it. So, I would like to have a day in court where they can tell their stories and it can be investigated. But yeah, that's one of the stories, that he was an FBI informant. JB Design says, I'll take it a step further. I think his marriage to Melania was to gain access to them via her modeling contacts. There's some stuff coming out about that. Yeah. Complex Design says informant is a very loose term, mind you. Yeah, because you can be breaking the law, doing the things, purveying all the stuff, and then at some point just decide to inform on the situation. So it doesn't make you free and clear. So that's a valid point, Complex Design. So the consequences extend beyond the immediate victims, because patriarchy and child exploitation normalized control and submission from a young age. We've been putting this in their heads. Might is right and supreme obedience. Teaching that authority, especially white male authority, is absolute. They instill in society a tolerance for inequality and a willingness to accept hierarchies as natural. Through misogyny and child indoctrination, the death cult ensures that its social architecture is internalized. Obedience becomes instinctive. Gendered hierarchy becomes unquestioned. And the mechanisms of control are reproduced across generations. What begins as religious instruction, social expectation, or elite abuse becomes a cultural habit, shaping citizens long before they participate in public life. And the way that this is put out to other marginalized or minority communities, the Black population, the way it rolls out to them may look a little bit different than what we see on the outside, but it's still the same playbook. Hierarchy is reinforced not only through ideology and culture, but through the criminal justice system itself. This is where I said I was going to talk more on that later. In the United States, mass incarceration has become one of the most visible and effective tools of social control, disproportionately affecting Black, Indigenous, and later some Hispanic communities. As documented by Michelle Alexander in The New Jim Crow, she wrote that in 2010, the war on drugs, coupled with aggressive policing and sentencing policies, transformed the criminal justice system into a mechanism for enforcing the social hierarchy. The Bureau of Justice Statistics confirms that although Black Americans constitute roughly 13% of the US population, they represent nearly 33% of the incarcerated population, illustrating the systemic bias embedded in reinforcement. And 56% of all our exonerations are Black people. So it's not that they commit more crime. So let's talk about the 13th Amendment. It says, there's two sections. Section 1, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted. I'm going to repeat that. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So if you are a convicted felon, you are legally allowed to be enslaved. That's literally what it says. Section 2, Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. What do you think federal prisons are? Or the new ICE facilities? They are and have been work camps. They are the Plantation 2.0, and all of America benefits from it. J.D. Vance's group is benefiting from it. The federal government benefits from it because the federal government contracts with these prisons to have a lot of their military items made for super cheap because they're work camps. So thank you, Diedrich Smith. Appreciate you so much. Thank you so much. And thank you for being here. Civil liberties have been eroded alongside incarceration. So policies such as mandatory minimums, the 3 strikes laws, and this expansive surveillance program have extended state power into private life. Voter disenfranchisement laws, often targeting formerly incarcerated individuals, like you did your time, you completed your punishment, but we're going to keep punishing you forever. Because once we say you're a slave, why would we ever let you be anything other than? They remove political agency from the most affected by systemic inequality, creating this feedback loop that consolidates power for the elite. And they're rolling back more and more even today. Immigration enforcement operates under the same logic. So the creation of ICE in 2003, documented in the congressional reports and the GAO audits, centralized authority over detention and deportation. They have the authority now. Detention centers, legal obstacles, and aggressive enforcement policy control, it makes the populations who are deemed undesirable, they're allowed to just be put in. This is why they've gotten rid of the due process. It extends that logic of mass incarceration beyond just the US citizens. And look at them now. They can wear masks, not identify themselves, kidnap and abuse anyone that they want, citizen or not. It's not just immigrants. In the raid of the Chicago apartment building, where ICE rappelled down from a Black Hawk helicopter at 3 a.m. to remove people from their apartments, some who were naked, to zip tie them and hold them in big box vans, the children were ripped away from their parents, zipped tied to each other, and kept in another hot box van for 4 hours. But hey, it's okay, because of all the people they pulled from the building, they got to arrest 37 people, 2 of which are suspected of being gang affiliated. 2. So all that trauma, American citizens went through, right? They just need to shut up about having a gun put in their face and having their screaming children ripped from their arms, having their pajamas or their bare ass be on display for the public. Totally worth it, right? To get those 2. So quick question. How did they find bin Laden in a cave across the world, but it's total destruction to find 2 suspected gang members? These systems are not neutral and they're not accidental. They serve to preserve social and economic hierarchies, translating fear, compliance, and marginalization into political stability for the powerful. By criminalizing poverty, restricting movement, delegitimizing dissent, the state enforces the supremacy with both subtlety and to scale. Mass incarceration and rights erosion are central to the death cult's practice. They make inequality enforceable. Obedience is habitual, and rebellion is very costly. They teach citizens, whether directly or indirectly, that the hierarchy is natural, dissent is dangerous, and the state has the ultimate authority over your life, liberty, and opportunity, and they don't have to pretend to follow affirmative action or DEI anymore. So power, at its most dangerous, is enforced through the exploitation of the most vulnerable. Human trafficking, child sex abuse, and elite networks of control illustrate how supremacy can operate through secrecy, fear, and impunity. High-profile cases demonstrate the intersection of wealth, politics, and abuse. Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell were convicted of sex trafficking, right, in federal court, right? There are documents about their connection to political and corporate elites, showing how wealth can now shield those perpetrators and facilitate the exploitation of children. I'm going to have you guys pause one moment because my dogs really need to go out and they keep kicking my feet. So talk amongst yourselves for a moment. All right, sorry about that. If anybody has dogs, you know how that is. Religious institutions have also been implicated in this child abuse. Multiple studies and legal cases document that clergy abuse children at rates higher than the general population, not drag queens. And I'm not saying I'm not saying anything about it. I'm just saying the clergy, okay? The John Jay College of Criminal Justice study on clergy sexual abuse of 2004 found that thousands of reported cases in Catholic institutions alone. And other reporting shows that the abuse occurs across denominations. Doesn't matter who. These abuses are often coupled with institutional cover-ups, allowing perpetrators to continue their crimes and maintain their authority. So, academic research on child sex abuse consistently finds that the majority of offenders are adult males. The FBI's behavioral profiles identify middle-aged white men as the most common demographic among convicted offenders. Studies, including the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and Department of Justice research, show that white men commit a disproportionate number of reported child sex offenses, reflecting systemic patterns rather than isolated incidents. Man, that entitlement runs deep, doesn't it? These patterns are not only criminal, but structural. Child abuse reinforces obedience. It normalizes secrecy and teaches submission to authority. Victims are rendered powerless, and institutions protect perpetrators, demonstrating how cultural, religious, and legal systems are weaponized to preserve the hierarchy. I wanted it, so I did it, and nobody can do anything about it. Look at all the states attempting to lower the age of consent and the age of marriage. These people want to bring back child marriage. Luckily, most states won't budge on it. But my state, it's 15 to get married. 15 to get married. But this abuse and treating children as young men or young women, saying, let me back up, because there is a difference, right? If a woman is caught grooming and sexually abusing a boy, they will say it's a relationship with an underage man. Underage man? That's ridiculous. Underage means child. An underage man is a boy. An underage woman is a girl. These are children. There's no such thing as an underage man. They're not a man yet. Or an underage woman. They're not a woman yet. Okay? But we see when it comes to white people, especially boys, they're protected. For others, they're seen as adults for both sex and crime. Right? We want to start really, punishing people as adults, trying people as adults at age 14 because these thugs and lawless and blah, 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 right? We know who they're talking about. And if it's for sex, we want them to be able to consent as young as possible, right? But those young Republican texts we just talked about, well, J.D. Vance comes out and says, well, kids will do dumb things. You remember the article, 18 to 40. A 35-year-old is not. Kids will do dumb things. So on a Truth Social post on August 5th, Trump posted, this is part of what he posted, crime in Washington, D.C. is totally out of control. Local, and he put it in quote, youths and gang members, some only 14, 15, and 16 years old, are randomly attacking, mugging, maiming, and shooting innocent citizens at the same time knowing that they will be almost immediately released. There's a reason why he called them youth and gang members. Okay? There's a reason. He wants to invoke blackness. Okay? They are not afraid of law enforcement because they know nothing ever happens to them, but it's going to happen now. The law in DC must be changed to prosecute these minors as adults and lock them up for a long time, starting at age 14. Yet the 30-year-old young Republicans are, well, people do dumb things, right? Kids do dumb things. JB Design says the new stat people are using is 2870. I love that. And there was another live on another creator, Marcus Aurelius, that I gave stats too that stated that. Since white dudes are 28% of the population, but commit, well, it's almost 70% of sex crimes, who are the biggest threat again. And think about that video that went viral where there's a white mom telling her white daughter, if you're ever lost, find a black man. Because statistically, black men are the safest. It's just how it is, right? Through human trafficking, clergy abuse, and elite exploitation, the death cult demonstrates its willingness to subordinate morality to power. Children in these systems become tools for control, for coercion. Oh, that's right, JB Designed, you were there. So, this child abuse is for the maintenance of the social dominance. By exploiting the most vulnerable, these networks ensure that hierarchy is internalized early, obedience is enforced, and the authority of elites remains unchallenged.
All right, so the first question I have for you is, what is happening in Israel? Right now, as you know, Israel is besieging, bombarding Gaza. You might have seen the videos on social media. It is disturbing, it is terrible what is happening. The word that is happening, the word that we use for what is happening in Gaza is this word. You're not allowed to say this word on YouTube, but that is the intention. What I will argue, though, is that the truth is far more disturbing than this. What is really happening in Gaza is a ritual sacrifice. And this happens quite often in human history. If you go back and you look at the real history of humanity, this happens quite often. Some of the most famous examples are the Aztecs. We've dug up temples of the Aztecs, and inside the temples are thousands and thousands of human skulls. So before they went to war, they practiced human sacrifice. They would commit mass murder of their enemies in public. So the Aztecs were really famous for this. The Phoenicians, specifically the Carthaginians. We will discuss them later this semester, but the Phoenicians were also famous for a particular type of sacrifice, which is child sacrifice. The Romans wrote histories insulting the Phoenicians for practicing this sort of sacrifice. But the Romans themselves practiced human sacrifice. What they would do is that after every major war, they would capture all the major leaders, all their enemies, and they would parade their enemies through the streets of Rome. This is something called a triumph. At the end of the triumph, they would gather enemies at the temple of Jupiter. Jupiter is their god. And then they would strangle to death their enemies. That's sacrifice. That's human sacrifice. They didn't call it that, okay? And they sort of disguised it, but we know for a fact that they did do this. So the question for us is, why is it that this happens? Why do the Aztecs do it? Why do the Phoenicians do it? Why do the Romans do it? And why is it today the Israelis do it in Gaza? And remember, okay, what the Israelis are doing is quite horrific because it is really this sort of sacrifice. Why? Because 47%, almost half of the population of Gaza is under 18 years old. So the majority of people who are getting killed are in fact children. What is most striking or blatant about what's happening in Gaza is that we can all see it for ourselves. And it's almost as though the Israelis want us to see it and want us to hate them, right? You can see all over the world, popular opinion is turning against Israel. You have these popular protests all around the world, protesting what is happening in Palestine. If they really want to do this, right, there are actually much more effective ways of doing this. For example, you could just poison their water, or you could poison the air so that everyone in Gaza gets a fast cancer, right? We have the technology to do this. So Israel could do this secretly, and no one would talk about it. And in 20 years' time, 30 years' time, the population of Gaza would all be gone. It would be a very secret, right? Instead, they choose to do this in front of the world. And my argument to you is that this is intentional. They want the world to hate them. Because by doing this, they create the ultimate taboo, right? We find this disgusting and contemptuous, so the entire world will unite against Israel. But guess what? That's what their religion wants. In the extreme form of Jewish eschatology, or the religion, they believe that at the end of the world, Israel will fight the entire world, and God will help Israel triumph in the end.
Interesting, huh? All right, the final instrument of supremacy is the systematic erosion of rights. From voting and privacy rights to reproductive freedom and protest, civil liberties are being continuously constrained to preserve the hierarchy and the control. Historically, laws and court decisions have restricted the political power of marginalized communities. The Jim Crow era imposed literacy tests, poll taxes, and other barriers to voting, documented in federal records and historical analyses. You can find them. Today, voter ID laws, felony disenfranchisement, and gerrymandering perpetuate similar effects, disproportionately limiting the participation of Black, Indigenous, some Hispanic, and low-income populations, as reported by the Brennan Center for Justice. You can look up those numbers. There are pastors and content creators on social media now with thousands of followers who say the Civil Rights Act was a mistake. And they're calling for the vote to be repealed from women. So we see Supreme Court rulings siding with supreme power to the president. We see the disregard for the laws and for the Constitution. But then, ironically, they invoke law and order to harm other people. This group is the most skilled at projection. Violence, child abuse, lawlessness, etc., are all historically settler, colonial, elitist tools, not tools that were ever used by the disenfranchised. Freedom of speech and assembly is also constrained when dissent challenges hierarchy. Government surveillance programs detailed in documents released by the Department of Justice and congressional oversight reports have monitored activists, civil rights organizations, and religious communities. Protesters face criminalization. They're being watched. And there's legal obstacles that reinforce the power imbalance and deter the opposition. What did Trump say? He wants his opposition destroyed. He's not the president of everyone in the United States. So he said, Portland is ravaged, war-torn, and on fire. The blow-up frog says differently. Protests include people wearing blow-up costumes, ukuleles played by senior citizens, and a block party complete with the electric slide. But the narrative is repeated over and over and over, even though it's a lie. Reproductive rights, access to health care, and bodily autonomy are similarly contested. Policies restricting contraception and sex education have been justified through moral, religious, and nationalist arguments. You see, they don't see a line between church and state. It's often echoing the same hierarchy-focused logic seen in eugenics and Christian nationalist ideology. Peer-reviewed studies, including Guttmacher Institute research, which I brought up on this channel before, document how these policies disproportionately affect women and marginalized communities. I just watched a video yesterday, I didn't even have time to get it clipped up for this, where RFK was saying that 65-year-old men are the best reproductive choice for teen girls. Blech. 65-year-old men are the best reproductive choice for teen girls. To be clear, this group is not pro-life. They are pro-birth because they don't want to be replaced. But once the child is born, they don't want you to have welfare, no WIC, no school breakfasts and no free lunch, no help with school supplies, no vagrancy, no nothing. And school shootings? Well, according to Charlie Kirk, gun deaths are okay if it means you get to keep your Second Amendment right to bear arms. And if a 10-year-old child gets pregnant, too bad. The unborn fetus is more important than the child that is already born. See, pro-birth, not pro-life. They are a death cult after all. So through their legislation, their executive action, and social influence, the death cult consolidates authority by limiting choice, limiting access, limiting your agency. Civil liberties are not merely abstract ideals, they are the mechanisms through which citizens can resist this domination. By rolling back these rights, the elite ensures compliance. It curtails the dissent, and it protects the existing hierarchies. The culmination of these practices, policy, weapons, social control, creates a society in which power is concentrated, hierarchy is normalized, and resistance is costly. From the sterilization laws of the early 20th century to contemporary surveillance, mass incarceration, and the political rhetoric, the architecture of supremacy endures. Adrian says, these dudes is just nasty. I don't disagree. Spainman says, sound like they want Sharia law after all. Absolutely do. But awareness of this stuff, more and more people are awakening to what is going on. By the way, that's where woke came from. It was Black people saying, keep your head on a swivel, because they could see all of this stuff and have been trying to tell us for the longest damn time, but we don't listen. So awareness is the first step to change. And it doesn't matter if you've been asleep, honestly, if you woke up now, if you're awakened to the shit now, excuse my language, okay. By sharing history, the real history, not the fake stuff and the changes in narratives that they're putting out, analyzing these structures of power and illuminating the way that these ideologies, force, and exploitation intersect, society can, on some level, challenge the systems designed to control it. Knowledge is the most enduring defense against hierarchy. That's why they hate education. And vigilance is the most practical tool. For me, and it's just me, the question is, how long will people accept the structures imposed upon them? Or will they fight for the promise of democracy, equality, and justice? All right, I want to thank you guys for being with me. We're just under 2 hours, which you guys know for me is pretty long, but I wanted to get all of this out here. I did not want to have a part 2 because next Sunday, it's going to be a bit of a lighter show, but it's more introspective. It's a little bit more about mental health, but I think you guys will really like it. It's what flavor of tism did you get, as in autism or neurodivergence? And I think it'll be kind of a fun show. It's a little bit lighter. There's a lot of heavy stuff going on. So maybe it's time for a little introspection. So I wanted to be able to do that next Sunday. And of course, on Wednesdays, we're going to continue with the Book of Knowledge, the Keys of Enoch, dissecting these different keys. We are almost done. We've got just a few weeks left, and then we'll move on to some other books that we're gonna dissect. So I thank you all for being here. And before I forget, I love you, I miss you, and you're my favorite. Now I'm going to show you a picture of my dog.
Please like the video if you haven't already. It really helps the algorithm to know what kind of things you like. Share where you think it's appropriate, especially to someone who you think needs to hear it. And don't forget to check out some of the wilder Pivot Point Wednesday shows. And last, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, especially if you want to break down complex concepts that make the esoteric not so teric, helping you on your journey to become your most authentic self. By subscribing, you'll join a community that thrives on curiosity and growth, and you'll never miss out on insights and some wild discussions. Let's uncover the universe together.